afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our first webinar in our autumn webinar series on building sustainable communities, national and international perspectives. My name is Aoife Corkin, and I'm the Sustainability Advisor here at the Housing Agency, working in the area of sustainability and sustainable communities. I'm joined today by my colleague Tara Doyle, who's running the back end of the webinar, and by our guest speakers, Lily Maxwell from the European Federation of the Living, Marie Longueville from Vilogia, and Ostermeyer from Chalmers University. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to a couple of things. First of all, we have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. If you have any questions, we would ask that you use the Q&A function. The Q&A feature provides you with an option to post anonymously. If you just want to make comments, please just add them to the chat. As always, we always have lots of requests to share who our webinar participants are. However, for various reasons, we can't do this. But if you'd like to share your name and where you're from, please do so in our chat feature. Finally, just be aware that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Housing Agency YouTube channel later in the week. The slides can also be made available upon request. The agenda for today's webinar is as follows. I'll give you a very short introduction to the Housing Agency and the Autumn Webinar Series. And then our guest speakers, Lily Maxwell from the European Federation of the Living, Marie Longueville from Vilogia, and York Ostermeyer from Chalmers University will then present on their insights on EU funding for sustainable housing. We will then have a questions and answer session where we would encourage you to participate and ask any relevant questions you may have. If we can't answer your questions as part of this webinar, we'll make every effort to answer them at a later stage. We aim to keep today's webinar on time, but just to note, Marie will have to leave us after the first hour, so if you have any questions for her, I'd urge you to get them in early. The Housing Agency, which is hosting this series, is a state agency based in Upper Mount Street in Dublin. The Housing Agency works with and supports local authorities, approved housing bodies, the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, and the private sector in the delivery of housing and housing services. Our vision is to enable everyone to live in good quality, affordable homes in sustainable communities. It's the Housing Agency vision for achieving sustainable communities and our recognition that the provision of housing in Ireland must be aligned with national and international climate and sustainability agreements, which has inspired this second series. The aim of the Autumn Webinar Series is to contribute to, stimulate discussion on sustainability topics which are relevant for housing, to raise awareness of the importance of building resilient and sustainable communities in the light of local, national and global shocks to the system, and to create opportunities for collaboration and hopefully some future projects. This webinar series explores 4 topics which are relevant for housing: financing for sustainable housing, which we will discuss today, community-led town regeneration, mobility and sustainable transport, and sustainable building certification. Today, we are delving into the world of financing the future of housing, insights on EU funding for sustainable housing from across Europe. We're lucky to have 3 international speakers with us today, all with knowledge and experience in this area. Our first speaker is Lily Maxwell. Lily is Network and Communications Officer at the European Federation of Living and Policy and Project Officer at the European Urban Knowledge Network. She spent the last 5 years studying and working in policy making, research, marketing, communications for a range of commercial and public organisations in the field of urbanism, culture and the arts, EU regional policy making and digital innovation. Her research interests are broad with particular focus on housing, digital and civic engagement in political processes and urban planning and governance. Lily, the floor is yours.
Hi everybody. Tara, if you could just show my presentation, that'd be great. Well, before we start, I'll just give you a brief background. As Aoife said, my name is Lily Maxwell and I'm the Network and Communications Officer at the European Federation for Living. I'll give you a little background on the European Federation for Living, just so you know, before I begin the presentation, which will mainly focus on EU funding for sustainable housing, as you can see. So the European Federation for Living is a European network of housing associations, companies and experts working to create more affordable, sustainable housing. At the moment, we have over 70 members and associates from 19 European countries with a joint portfolio of more than 1.3 million dwellings and business units across Europe. We combine the shared knowledge of social housing providers, our members, with the cutting edge thinking of leading universities and the innovative work of private and public sector organisations who are our associate partners. We offer easy access to insights, information and expertise from the European housing sector and to knowledge sharing and sometimes EU funded projects. So that's a little bit about us. And I will now begin my presentation. So I'll be going over, if you could just go back to the last slide, sorry. Just to give you an overview of what I'll be talking about. Well, okay, doesn't matter. I'll first be looking into EU funding from the perspective of housing providers to give you a little overview of what you might need to know as a housing provider. I'll then give you an example of one programme called LIFE, which may be relevant to your work. I'm then going to look a little bit at the situation with EU funding at the moment, and then I'll conclude. Before I begin part one, I'd like to preface that most of this information is actually from a presentation that was given during our own EU funding webinar in June, EFL funding, EU funding webinar, that was provided by Rolf Bastiansen from Bax & Company, which is a consulting company who actually write EU proposals. And I thought that his presentation of the different EU funding options for housing providers was really, really, really cool. And he gave a great breakdown. So I'm going to do that. So if you just go to the next slide. Oh, no, in fact, stay on this slide. If you could just go back to the previous slide, sorry. So what you need to know as a housing provider. So the first thing you really need to know about EU funding is that it's highly specialised and highly competitive. There are about 50 European funding programmes and hundreds of calls every year. And it's very hard to get EU funding, more or less. The administrative burden is extremely high, so it requires quite a lot of investment, about 100,000 euros in staff time. But the success rate is quite low. So as you can see, H2020 proposal success rates are about 10 to 15%. The success rates do vary according to the programme, and they also vary according to if you are working in a consortium, perhaps with partners who may have previous experience of EU proposal writing, or if you hire a consultancy, your success rates are likely to be higher. But it's a lot of work. So you need to know why you're going for EU funding, what you need it for, and you need to be ready to make the investment. Next slide, please. So there are roughly 3 different types of programs that you might be going for. The first is research and development. This is where H2020 fits into. So when it comes to research and development, you're going to be looking at projects that are driven by companies or perhaps universities who want to test a new product or a service, and they want to be using your assets, the buildings, to test or pilot this product or service in. Typically, they're 5 to 15 million euros, 4 years long, and have about a 20% success rate when you apply. You will be contributing buildings, perhaps technical team, and as the housing provider, you'll probably be managing a budget of like 250 to 750,000 euros. And the success of the project really often depends on you, because you're piloting not just on the technology or the service, but actually on your own role in it, because you'll be piloting the service. Here you actually won't be leading the project, it will be led by the company or the university doing it. And so you need to be aware that you won't be in control as a housing provider. And for that reason, you should have a high level of confidence in the provider that's leading the project, and you need to accept that there's some risk involved. Next slide, please. So the second type is where you'll be slightly more in control, innovative approaches such as LIFE and Interreg. And here you'll probably be developing a process, not really a piece of hardware or a product in that sense. And so you might be developing, for example, new ways to understand or roll out energy efficiency policy and new processes for tenant engagement, etc. And you'll be coming together with other housing providers or like-minded organisations to jointly develop this. And it will require your active leadership and probably a strong coordinator or coordinating team within your own company. These are typically 2 to 5 million euro projects, 4 years long. And one example is a new cooperative living concept here. There is slightly more risk here in a sense because it's bottom-up project development. So you don't want to risk over-investing in a project that might not be relevant to your own work, or accepting a role in such a project that you actually can't fulfill because you don't have the staff time or money. So you need to really think about how much time, how much money and investment can I really give to this kind of project. Next slide, please. And the last type is investment, and this generally tends to come from funds, EU funds like the Innovation Fund, and also from a programme called ELENA, which is supported by the European Investment Bank, EIB. These projects, you can tend to get sometimes a little bit more money, 1 to 3 million euros, to actually develop or sort of preparation for bigger scale projects. We're talking like 30 to 40 million euros to perhaps scale up existing sustainability programs that you have to across your whole housing stock, for example, or much more of your housing stock. So if you apply for ELENA, they will provide you with money to perhaps invest in specialists to roll out the project or engage with tenants to get them on board, etc. So this, again, a bit like the innovation process, will require you to really take a lead and be very kind of leading the way in developing the project itself. Okay, next slide, please. So overall, what you need to know is that you should think of EU funding as a tool, not a kind of goal in itself. It's a tool to help you achieve a specific end. And you need to know what you want to achieve and what you're using it for right from the beginning. If you're thinking about, for example, developing your own product or your own app or something, it may be worth thinking, how could I go for an H2020 program where a specialized technology provider or a university is already doing this and I just pilot it? Or thinking, can I just buy the results? Can I buy the product instead? Because if you invest a lot of money in an EU funding proposal, you may not get it, but you may be able to put that money into an existing very good product or service. And if you do get involved, you need to position yourself well in the development process. You need to be selective. You need to be clear about the mutual expectations of different partners. You need to think about what role you want to have, what can you offer, and what do you want to get out of it. And that really means, in the end, assessing the rewards and the risks of this kind of project before getting involved. Okay, next slide, please. So one example of a funding programme is the LIFE programme, which many of you may well have heard about already. Next slide, please. So what's LIFE? LIFE is focused on projects that help Europe overall to meet their environmental and climate action goals, mitigation and adaptation. It's funded around 4,600 projects across the EU and other countries, and it's looking like there's going to be more funding for it in the new multi-annual financial framework. And the good thing about LIFE is that you can combine it with other funding sources, which makes it slightly more flexible. And sustainable finance projects are also included. Next slide, please. So there are two different kind of LIFE project types, integrated and traditional. Integrated, you don't need to worry about because it's EU member states implementing strategies, although of course they may be relevant to you sort of indirectly. But the main ones you want to think about are traditional projects. These are action grants for best practice, pilot and demonstration projects that contribute to reducing emissions and the implementation of EU policy and law, best practices and solutions. In the context of the EU Green Deal, this is very relevant because the Green Deal is going to be, or already is, kind of bringing forward regulation, legislation, policy around climate targets. So LIFE will be very relevant here. Next slide, please. So the criteria for LIFE are quite open. You can be a single company applying to it, or you can do it in partnership in a consortium with other partners. Traditionally, it's pilot projects, and they would like generally for you to have replicable, measurable outcomes, results. It's up to 55% co-funded, so slightly less than H2020 actually, but you can combine it with other sources, so you may be able to find other funding that to put them together. And the good thing about LIFE compared to H2020, for example, is that the success rate tends to be a little bit higher. So it's around about 25 to 40%. And another plus is that you can submit proposals, and if they get rejected, you can actually receive feedback and resubmit them, revise them, resubmit them. And actually, this is quite common practice with live programs. So if you get a first rejection, it actually doesn't mean necessarily that this project won't go ahead. You may need to just look over it, resubmit, and see what happens. Next slide. And within LIFE, within the traditional projects, probably the most relevant one that we're going to be looking at is the Climate Action Subprogram. This is focused on mitigation and adaptation, and as you can see, everything environmental. And it really focuses on knowledge sharing and integrated approaches. And the thing that's quite great for us is that it encourages close to market projects, green products, technology, services. So you can be testing out new processes, new products with your tenants in your buildings. Next slide, please. And there are some new features for LIFE relating to COVID-19. There's now a special section on startup companies, inviting larger companies to consider their LIFE project as a potential incubator for startups. So you may be able to kind of be testing out some really cutting edge technologies through being involved in a LIFE project. There are also possibility for LIFE projects, for project partners to financially support local initiatives, which may mean that you can put some money towards local organisations that you work with. And there is also a new thing, which is that kind of, I think, also going to be a thing with other funding programmes, that the EU is going to want to see project applicants putting forward proposals that take into account the impacts of the pandemic and looking towards a green recovery, basically. Next slide. And as you can see, LIFE in Ireland, LIFE has already been financed a lot of projects in Ireland. So there is already a country connection there. Next slide, please. And this is a great example LIFE project. I don't have time to show you the video for this today, but we'll be sending around, I think Aoife will be sending around all the presentations afterwards, and I've left a YouTube link below in the notes. So if any of you want to take a look at kind of potential example LIFE project, it's right here. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm just going to take a little look, I'm aware that I may be running out of time soon, at the actual state of play with EU funding, policy and legislation. So basically, at the moment, as many of you will know, there's a lot of talk about the EU Green Deal, the EU Recovery Plan, Climate Target Plan, lots of different things that all seem to be aiming towards basically making a smarter, more digital and greener Europe. And very recently, only in the last few days and weeks, they've actually increased the emissions reduction target to at least 55% by 2030, which is quite significant because they're probably going to bring that into legislation, and that will have concrete impacts on what's happening on the ground. Next slide, please. How does this translate into funding? Well, we know that the Recovery Plan, Next Generation EU, and the new multi-annual financial framework will be really focusing on greening. And the EU Commission is putting it out there that they think that we're going to need an extra 260 billion of additional annual investment from both public and private sectors to achieve their own targets. Next slide, please. So these are to go over it, these are the 5 main objectives that will be driving the EU investments. And as you can see, a smarter Europe and a greener carbon-free Europe are the top 2, basically. Next slide, please. And residential, from our perspective, is getting a lot of attention. So there is a lot of reference to making buildings more energy efficient, to dealing with energy poverty, and to generally investing in the residential sector in much of the European Commission's online and other information. So here we have a little table showing basically how much money will need to be invested in the residential sector to meet the targets. Next slide. And there's a lot of talk also within this of the renovation wave. So the EU Commission is expecting all member states to submit a national recovery and resilience plan by April 2021, and that will need to cover a number of points, one of which, or they're suggesting it should cover, It won't have to, but they're encouraging it to uncover these points, one of which is renovate, the improvement of energy efficiency of public and private buildings. So we should see, hopefully, some national level filtering of EU funding into this particular area, as well as EU level projects. Because how much money will be going into energy efficiency doesn't just depend on the EU, it also depends on how the member states choose to allocate the funding that they get. And the Commission will also be launching an open platform, bringing together the building and construction sector, architects, engineers, and local authorities to see how energy efficiency in buildings can be improved. This is something that's also been happening for a while via different things I might mention a little bit later. And at EFL, we also have a financing climate target project, for example, and other networks similar to us will be doing this kind of knowledge sharing already. And the European Commission mentioned that there will be measures to help consumers keep their homes warm, with particular attention paid to the renovation of social housing to assess households that struggle to pay energy bills. So they're going to be looking into probably funding projects to do with energy poverty, etc. And it's interesting here that they mentioned social housing explicitly. Next slide, please. So how does this relate to Ireland? Well, we actually just don't know completely yet. But what we do know is that Ireland will benefit directly from the Next Generation EU instrument, with grants worth almost 2 billion, and 1.2 billion will come from the new Recovery and Resilience Facility. You guys now have a coalition with the Green Party. There's a lot of talk about how that will lead to more policies, more funding for greening. And we've seen already in the 2021 budget that motorists have been somewhat hammered. So this may be a first step, and perhaps buildings may be next, who knows. Okay, next slide, please. So some questions remain. What will the Green Deal Recovery Plan mean for our sector concretely? We're going to be finding out basically over the next few days, weeks and months. How will the individual member states each allocate funding that they apply for? How much of that is going to go towards residential? And will increased regulation also mean equally increased finance to meet those targets? Continue, please. Next slide. So I'm going to leave you with just my top tips for getting into EU funding programmes based on our own EFL EU funding webinar and my experience. So really you should first think about the exact areas you want to work on. Like, are you focusing on energy efficiency? Are you focusing on elderly care? Are you focusing on tenant engagement? Maybe all of them. And then once you've figured out those areas, which ones do you think you most need EU funding for? Then you should think about the most appropriate programme type for your own organisation, and in terms of how much funding you need and what kind of role you want to play, and the individual call. Once you've chosen this, you should cater your approach to the programme and the call. So if you're going for something like research and development for H2020, you probably want to be positioning yourself as a partner in a project that's led by a company or a university who has a solution to pilot with you in your stock or with your talents. I need to be clear about your role here. You need to trust the partner. One way to start doing this is perhaps to reach out to the universities that you already have contact with, either on a one-to-one level or perhaps through a network like us, like EFL or Housing Europe, who may have university contacts that you can have access to via this network. You can send them a one-pager perhaps on the topics you're interested in and see if they are already applying to EU funding projects that you could potentially become a partner in. If you're going for process innovation, you may want to invest in your own in-house EU coordinator, and you want to make sure that you're getting together with reliable friends and partners. And if you're going for investment, you're again going to need your own in-house leadership on this, and you may want to integrate it into your investment plans. And the most important thing when you're starting the process is to position yourself well. Be clear about what you want to get out of the project and what you can offer, what your roles and responsibilities will be. And if you want to boost your prospects for EU funding, you could consider hiring your own EU project coordinator, like Marie, who's going to be speaking today. You might want to join an international network if you're not already part of one, such as the European Federation for Living. And you may want to hire a consultancy, although this is something that probably will happen once you've got a group of partners together. Next slide, please. So these I'm going to leave you with basically just some EU funding programs that you should keep an eye on and some cool links that you should maybe check out to gather more information and start your EU funding journey. So next slide, please. These are some relevant calls that are open now. Next slide. Useful websites and next slide. Thank you for listening. If you'd like more information, feel free to get in touch with me, and Aoife will share my presentation with you, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lily, for some great insights into some of the EU funding that's currently available, and some top tips for our listeners who may want to avail of EU funding into the future. Our next speaker is Marie Longueville. Marie joined the European projects team of excuse my pronunciation and my thick double accents, Vilogia in 2017. She graduated in civil engineering in 2009. After her studies, she worked in Asia for 4 years in construction and industry project management, and then worked for 4 years in French civil works project management. She's now working on technical and social innovation projects, motivated by her greatest interest for social domain and European collaboration. She's currently involved in H2020 In Between projects, Interreg Digital Deconstruction project, and the H2020 Cultural E project, and actively supports the development of new projects. Marie, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. So I just share my screen. Okay, I hope everything will be working. Hope you can see that. Yeah. So, of course, it's at the end of the presentation. So, I'm Marie, as Aoife just presented me before. I'm project manager in Vilogia, dedicated to European projects. I'm here today to share my experience with the European project in a social housing organization. So here you have a short presentation about Vilogia. Vilogia is a French social housing company. We own more than 73,000 dwellings across France, and it represents more than 150,000 tenants. We are really involved in sustainable buildings. We refurbish and deliver new construction more and more every year to face the demand that we actually have in France. We have internal objectives such as reducing the energy consumption at the portfolio level, so that we increase our impact. We are a social landlord, we are a builder and a planner. And among all the teams of the company, we are actually 2 persons dedicated to European projects, among a team dedicated to innovation, the innovation department. And EU projects, what do they do? Why they are useful? Because they boost initiatives and innovation experiences that may not emerge or take shape without EU co-financing. And for us, Vilogia, it contributes to insulate the spirit of innovation in our teams, and also allow to test innovative technologies that we may not test without this co-financing. They were initiated by the CEO at the beginning. They are managed, as I just told you, within the innovation department, and they always have to align with Vilogia's strategies and priorities. Until now, we mainly have experiences with 2 programs called Horizon 2020 and Interreg, as Lily explained just before. And how did it start? Actually, it started with EFL, the European Federation for Living. We have been part of it since 2011, and it was also the time of the creation of I Stay at Home, the first project that you can see on the slide. And now we have been participating to 9 projects, but it also represents more than 20 proposals that were submitted. And, as you can see, more than half of it failed. So as I will tell you after that, you have also to be ready for that. Those projects actually cover a wide range of topics, which is also representing all the challenges that social housing companies have to face. I will give more details about that just after. With, for example, those 4 projects which are now finished. So as I was telling you, the first one was I Stay at Home, and it was dealing with ICT solutions made to help an aging society. So what we did is with other landlord, other social landlord, we participated with some of our tenants to this project, and those tenants accepted to test some technologies and to spend time with us. We trained them, we informed them. It was already 8 years back, so the society was not the same as today. And a lot of people actually were still far from technology, and we had them at least to get to know, to get used to internet, those simple things, to see their bank online, to be able to shop online and so on, so that it could ease their life and see how it could be done and what were the impacts for them. We also participated to the Trine project. It was dealing with energy savings, how to help our tenants to do energy savings. And this project was dedicated to create some energy communities. So we trained some energy ambassadors that had them to train their neighborhood about energy savings. Then a project that I know more because I arrived in Vilogia 3 years ago with this project starting. It's PV sites. It's about building integrated photovoltaics. So it's about PV, but that you can put on the roof or on the facade, and it replaces a structural element of your building. It was an Horizon 2020 project, which ended just this year in June. And as most of H2020 project, it was really technical. We talked there about the architectural integration, but also about all the electrical installation that is behind that. We have tested those panels that you can see on the right photo that we have been integrated in a facade of a building that is being refurbished now. The last project that you can see on this slide is the E=0 project. It was a project where we tested a process that was created and that came from Netherlands about industrial retrofittings, and with a commissioning part of it, with a warranty of more than 25 years. And the aim was to arrive to an energy balance which was neutral. So we are producing as much energy as we are using at the house level. So it was on individual houses. And you can see I put a special square around this project because while the 3 other projects really contributed to the increase of knowledge of our teams and to the strategies of the company that are being built every day, this E=0 has a high impact on our company because we then decided to reproduce, to replicate this process even without the EU funding. So you can guess that if we decided to do that, is that thanks to the European project, we could test it and we could be convinced about it. And I believe that it would not have been the same without this project. Our current projects are the following. So in between, for example, is dealing with ICTs, again with energy savings for our tenants, but tackling it from an ICT point of view. We provide people with a lot of sensors and with a mobile app so that they can visualize all their consumptions, even at the device level. And there are some individual tips to help them to act on their energy consumptions. The below one must be 0 is actually the same as E=0, but on collective buildings. So it's not at all the same because the challenges, the technical challenges are not the same. But again, the same process, Energy Sprong tested on a collective building to see if we can also replicate this for collective buildings. Other projects like digital deconstruction, dealing with deconstruction and how to create a platform to help to maximize the reuse and recycling of materials coming from deconstructions. Culturally project is dealing with plus energy buildings and with a common process across Europe to be defined for plus energy buildings with technologies dedicated to that developed within the project. It's also very technical. And the Green F project is done with the eastern part of France and Germany, Luxembourg, and so on, to promote and to spread sustainable building initiatives in that region. So these are examples. As you can see, as I was telling you, many different fields, many different ideas that can be developed thanks to European projects. So what you shouldn't think is that EU, through European projects, is just giving you funds to retrofit your buildings as usual. It's not what the Commission wants to do. What the Commission wants to do is to foster partnerships across Europe, to learn from each other and to bring up innovation initiatives across Europe. So I just wanted to share with you some usual key aspects, really talking about the field and about practical things. Most of the time, projects are done by a consortium of partners, as Lily said before, coming from various countries, types of organization, also different, like universities, social housing companies, or maybe not in other projects, research centers, and industrials, and so on. The projects are defined at a proposal stage that I will describe after, and several work packages have to be defined, and each one divided in several tasks, which will have to be done if the project is financed. To do this kind of project, all the partners have to understand each other. For you, it will be easier because you speak English, and I guess that all the members of your organizations speak English. So it's different from other countries where there is, let's say, a gap between the team which is involved in European projects and the other part of the company which is not speaking English, and there is always some misunderstanding and so on. So take advantage of this advantage that you have with the language. You will have to be able to work together with other partners to coordinate maybe some tasks or to be coordinated by some other organizations, and to deal with various working habits, expectations on the short or long term among partners. So what I wanted to emphasize here is that we are talking about a human story. It should not involve people who were said to do it, but who don't want to do it. It has to be done with people who really want to do that so that they are able to cope with all the difficulties that will arise during the project. Most of the time, projects should involve innovation aspects. So it's something different to be promised, to be done, and to be shown. All those three aspects are really important. And to be able to do that, something different, it should be supported at a high level in the company and align with the company's strategy so that it can happen with all the company's members that will be involved in the project. With the current programming period, the money was given against work done and already paid. So it means that funds usually arrive several months after the things were actually paid. So just be ready for cash flow. And the Commission does not want to see somebody that is saying that he has done something. They really want to see the things done. And they want to see that you are able to prove that. So there is also a lot of communication activities and paperwork involved in such projects. Many reports to be provided, to be written, so that they are called usually deliverables, and they are due as part of the project. They will be reviewed by the Commission, which will comment them. Maybe they will have to be again resubmitted and so on. So what I wanted to say through those statements is that it requires a lot of time. It's really a lot of time to be spent for those projects. It's worth it, but you have to know that it's a lot of time, really. And you have to dedicate appropriate human resources with the right competencies to do that. The energy, as I was telling you before, the motivation, and the readiness to share the knowledge. Just about the co-financing rates, it will depend according to the calls, the programs, the types of organization. Usually it's around 60 to 70%, but it can be up to 100%. So I will let you discover that according to the calls that you will decide to reply to. As I was telling you also, yes, the administration can be heavy. The requirements are strict, and you have to know that audits can happen up to 3 years after the end of the project. So I think you have to know that, but it's not a barrier. It's just something to keep in mind. And there is also this proposal stage. So it's a stage at which you will spend a lot of energy, of time, to define a potential project. So already it's a team story, because to define this project, you will have to discuss, to spend time with some partners, to define what you want to do, and how, and when, and so on. But sometimes it fails. Sometimes it's a huge success and you are just so happy about it, but sometimes it fails. So it's not 100% guarantee about success with those projects. And in case of success, what was written in the proposal, something that you wrote when you were not sure to do the project, and when you wanted your project to be selected, so maybe you wrote it in a seducing way, well, now you have to sign for it and to do that. So things have to be realistic, quite ambitious, but still realistic, because you will have to do those things after. So, and the Commission trusts you for that. And according to the program, you also have to know that things can be very technical. For example, with the PV site project dealing with photovoltaics, we have learned a lot, but we were really lost at the beginning. So when you decide to invest yourself in a project, just be sure, as Lily said just before, that you understand what will be done, what is awaited from you, and what are the competencies required for that. And if there is a gap between what you have and what you should have, then you have to discuss with the partners. Are they able to help you to increase your knowledge, or maybe you want to add some knowledge in the partnership or within your company, or maybe finally this project is too technical for you. So all those reflections have to be done at an early stage, and it's important to do that. So European projects, I really believe that it's an awesome opportunity for you, for your company, to increase your knowledge, to learn a lot, really, to increase the visibility of your organization, because as I was telling you, the communication part of such project is really important. So your organization will, of course, become more visible. And you will also anticipate potentially the future regulations and also the trends, get to know better the trends, because there is often a research part in such projects. So it's really an opportunity for you to work on new things and to develop your competencies and your knowledge. And to be able to do that, well, first, brainstorm on the problems and the difficulties that your organization is facing, or on which you could help to work on. And then you have to develop your network, European or regional network, according to the program. Interreg programs can be done on smaller geographical areas. And then get informed as well about the programs and the calls. And then I wish you all the best and a great success and a great experience with European projects. As it was said before, I'll have to leave at 2. So if you have questions, don't hesitate. I'll be available by email. Thank you for listening, and again, wish you all the best.
Brilliant, Marie. Thanks a million for that. And it's great to see so many projects and your truthful analysis that you need to be realistic when you get involved in these different sorts of projects. But great tips, and it's great to see that you can go from the funding that Lily talked about right through to projects, right through to yourselves making the adjustments to different properties based on what you've learned in different projects. So thanks a million for that. Our third speaker now is Jörg Ostermeyer, who is an associate professor at Chalmers University of Technology. The focus of his work is on the modelling of decarbonisation of larger building portfolios and digitalisation of buildings. He chairs work on data on the UNEP Global Alliance of Building and Construction and is a member of the Senate of the Economy in Germany. From his academic work, Jörg has started 2 legal entities that deal with data in the built environment, one commercial and one in the form of a not-for-profit. In the context of EU activities, he has led projects and tasks in several Horizon 2020 frameworks, including several that involve refurbishment activities supported as part of the project. Jörg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. I also try to share my screen. It should be working. There it is. Yeah, Thanks for having me. I will now giving a little bit my view on European projects, a little bit from an academic partner perspective, but maybe reflecting or connecting also to what Lily and Marie already hinted at. From my experience, there are 2 main reasons why European projects do not lead to the result that is expected from the Commission or wanted from the members, and it's typically one of the 2. Either the building owners, they are very often new to these frameworks, they are not prepared to actually deliver what is promised in the application. And the second thing, which is a typical pitfall, is that the academic partners are not able to deliver the outcome of the project in a form which is scalable. And I show you some examples for successes and also for failures. Coming to what we do, modeling of larger stocks. Well, basically, we are these kind of people who create these nice decarbonization graphs where a line goes down until it hits a target 2050. We do that by running scenarios which include policy, technology, innovation through a stock, which can be the stock of a city and it can be the stock of a country. So we work a lot on describing the stock, characterizing the stock, but also understanding policy effects, technologies, and economics behind it. The kind of indicators that we show are very environmental typical. Well, that's the indicators which are interesting to people, but actually, if you read the longer text of the policy documents that we create, you also see things like the necessary labor for creating that change, and there you will see a lot of limitations, because it's very easy by policy to ask for 5 times the refurbishment rate. Our key question is then always whether the labor is there to actually do that, and the answer very often is no. The policymakers' question is very easy. They just want to know what happens under certain policy and economic developments. Do we meet our target? Do we not meet our target? But the building owners' question differs a lot. The target is very often not in question. A lot of building owners actually do have a strict target. They want to be carbon neutral by 2040, 2050, or whatever. And the question is not what happens if. The question is, what do we have to do to reach the target? And what kind of investments do we need to make? And the graph I'm just showing is basically the result of such a work for a Swedish housing association over the years, where their stock was analyzed of what happened to it under certain assumptions, mainly on the energy infrastructure, on what is supposed to be invested into their stock. And I can already tell you that typically building owners drop dead when they are faced with the costs they have to budget if they're really serious about 2050 targets. So if it's really carbon neutral by 2050, depending on the complexity of your stock, 20 to 60,000 euro per unit, you get the idea. And of course, there's financing mechanisms and there's subsidy schemes. There's a return by energy savings, and there's maybe carbon taxes to take into account. But if the idea still is that basically it's a little bit like contributing to a European Union project and basically earning money with it, decarbonizing your stock and basically getting rich in the process, well, if it would be that easy, it would have been done long ago. So these are kind of European Union projects that we run. We work with building owners to look at their stock, to analyze things more on the concept level. And wait, no, it's not going to the next slide. We try to work with building owners to have a portfolio view, a kind of hotspot analysis. Like we are of course looking for the opportunities where with relatively little effort you can create the biggest environmental benefit. And we do that in one project, which I would consider semi-successful. We did that by developing or combining energy calculations by mathematical optimization algorithms. So what you typically get when you work with an energy consultant and you ask him to come up with a refurbishment scenario for one of your buildings, well, he creates a low ambition scenario, medium ambition scenario, and high ambition scenario. And of course, on the left side, you see the greenhouse emissions in kilogram per year, and on the bottom you see the necessary investment to get there to in euro. And of course, the more you invest, the lower you get your emissions down. You do not get them to zero because in the material that you put into it, there's emissions as well. But you typically get three scenarios, and let's be honest, you always take the middle one. The point is that it's a human approach, and it basically makes a proposal based on experience on what works well with each other. So what we did is actually let an optimization algorithm run over it, and you see that the optimization algorithm, which basically has, let's say, 100 options for each element of the building, and he can calculate the interactions. The optimization algorithm beats the human brain or the human expert at any time of the day by about 10%. And the problem, well, it's a tool that we actually did create out of a Horizon 2020 project. And the point why I say it seems successful is that it requires a lot of data to put into the tool in order to have an optimized refurbishment scenario for your building. Well, the question was, of course, what's your building made up of? What refurbishment options on the wall are applicable? Are we talking about a wood building? Are we talking about a brick building? What's the current condition of the windows? What's the surface area? What's the roof inclination? And all of that was promised by the building owners at the beginning of the project. Like, okay, we are going to deliver that data. So we thought we mainly have to think about cost data, but the left side is what we want, and the right side is what we get. So it turns out the lack of data is profound. There is or was in many cases no data on the condition of the stock necessary to calculate refurbishment options and refurbishment costs. And it's a massive problem. The lack of data is what I would now consider the biggest problem that we have in the built environment, because having that data and having good evidence and databases would enable so many supportive tools and solutions to kick in. And that's not only technical parts, but it's also some of financing to make having your assets digitalized makes them bankable. We worked a lot on building catalogs, a little bit similar situation there. The lack of data on the housing side was considered by everybody to be a big problem. And we basically spent years, well, we spent half a year to get to the level of honesty in the consortium, so that they said, okay, we actually do not have that data. And then thinking about solutions, how to get it, and it resulted in huge additional effort necessary to be invested. and there will be no additional budget in a European Union project. I think that's an important message. So you need to be very sure you have the capacity, but also can deliver what was promised in the very beginning with the budget you have. From that, basically, I mean, we are learning. We have a learning curve. It's not maybe the steepest, but we do have a learning curve. So we went into other European Union projects with a more skeptical view on what is the databases that we can work with, and our current thinking is more going into the direction to actually include very simple data collection tools in such projects, which do not require experts to use. So we, in another project, we went with providing actually a smartphone tool that technicians or non-skilled people can use on site to collect data, which is not interpreted by them. They would have to be an expert for that, but actually it's interpreted centrally. So we have picture recognition to read in serial numbers. We are not asking people to look into the wall and tell us the wall makeup, but actually we ask for the inner material, the outer material, the thickness of the wall, and we calculate the most logical wall makeup from that, and we cross-check it with energy consumption. So we try to close the gap, which is the lack of data, and that is what I would consider a more successful project. We did it with the second largest chain of supermarkets in Germany, where we actually, it is a project focused on energy efficiency, but the data collection is a byproduct of rolling out an energy efficiency measure in that supermarket company. And we basically, the thing they are still using is the database. And it was a process where the European Union project was used to actually create a database and also implement digitalization into the DNA of the company, so that they more and more build up data. And of course, we saved a lot of carbon, and I would consider it to be a successful project by that account. But the thing they are still using is the database. For getting an even better understanding, and actually based on that data and on that evidence, organize and plan their other energy efficiency activities. So that is more the direction that we are currently going to. We actually, and that's why I also would consider it a successful project, we created a startup out of the university to actually have that or run that database and provide it to the supermarket company on a commercial level, which was a big asset to the supermarket company, because they said typically we do not like to do projects with academic partners, because you do your research, you publish a paper, and then you're gone, and that's not what we can work with. We do not benefit from the paper. We need a product to come out of that we can buy. And I think that's something for the universities to reflect. If the end result for an academic partner is a paper, the project with that academic partner doesn't make it a very attractive project for the non-academic partner. The non-academic partner has a problem, and ideally after the project he understands the problem and learned how to solve it. But also there needs to be a broader solution, a scaling option for that. And that the Commission wants to see that, but I think that is something still very on not receiving enough attention. What's the commercialization or the rollout or the scaling strategy, assuming a successful project? And it's something that also universities need to think more and more of. So I would be closing with the remark that actually from this project, we as an academic partner, we profit because we are doing better research. So we did not only do one supermarket, we by now I think did 500. And of course, if you have data on 500 supermarkets, you do better research and you write better paper than on one market. And the same will be true for buildings. I mean, it's nice to go into projects with building owners and work on 2-3 of their buildings in the process, but there's better research in scale and there's societal impact in scale. So That is a little bit my learning and state of mind at the moment on these kind of European Union projects. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that was a little bit helpful, albeit being the academic view on it. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, York, for giving that overview of the different projects and some of the issues that you come across. Just to let everyone know, Marie has had to leave us. She had a prior engagement. So if anyone has any questions for Marie, please send them in and we'll make sure we get answers to them. And she has agreed to answer any of them by email. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A forum, but I might just start with one. Just to you, Lily, I suppose listening to your presentation, it's evident that getting involved in any sort of EU funded project for housing and social housing is very hands-on. So is that what we kind of find from the different members or the different projects, is that you really need to have the capacity to get involved? So is that what you're finding from the different projects?
Well, I mean, obviously, as everyone's talked about, it does depend on the kind of project that you're going for. If you're taking a leading role or if it's being led by another organisation, it depends on the stage of the project. It may be that you play a particular role, for example, during the piloting phase, but you're not involved for the first, well, you are involved, but not to the same extent for the first, few months of the development bit or for the writing of the proposal itself. I mean, as Marie and York have both emphasised as well, you just have to be prepared to know that this is a project. It's not like you just submit a proposal and then bam, you have a solution that sort of appears in your buildings and you just have this money. You have to use the money to invest in staff hours, basically. And that's why a lot of organisations, a lot of housing providers like Vilogia do have an in-house project manager focused on EU funding like Marie. Because you obviously will get guidance from the partner organisations, such as York's own organisation, who may be leading an H2020 project, for example. But you're going to need somebody who can be delivering not just during the EU funding application, but also, for example, evaluating the project as you go along, monitoring the project results. That's a big part of projects. It's not just over once you've got the funding as such. So yes, this is not to discourage people from doing it, because as Marie highlighted, it can be a really, really great thing, even if 70% of your applications fail. If 30% of those projects don't, and you get very concrete project results, as some of York's work has highlighted, it can really, really be worth the investment. Okay,
and thanks very much for that, Lily. York, would you concur with Lily's comments about having kind of an EU project manager or a set team set aside before you get involved in any of these EU funded projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very, very essential thing. First of all, I've been now involved in a number of H10 to 20 projects, and there's not been a single one. I think the average amount of money we were handing back to the Commission has been £500,000 at the end of the project, and that's because partners were not able to spend the money. And it's typically not the academic partners. We are good at spending money. What the money you give to us, you will never see it back. If we get more money, we do more research. It's the way the academic organizations work. We're not consultancy agencies, so they would just call it profit, but we just recruit more PhD students. We're a black hole for money. It's
That's not a great
different.
Advertisement for academia, York.
You can come with a truckload of money, and I find a way to spend it. It's different with public stakeholders or building owners. They of course they can pay staff costs, and in some cases they can spend it on material, depending on the call. Very, very important. You can only spend it typically on the amount which is depreciated during the time of the project. No, you cannot pay your PV system. You can only pay for 3 years of your PV system. And especially when everything is delayed, which is a typical problem, you might have budgeted 3 years of PV depreciation. It doesn't work anymore. You is not paying for that anymore. and it's delayed for 2 years, then you can only get the money for a year. And if you do not recruit a person, or if you feel that in the end you cannot deliver certain stuff, you might have problems claiming the money. So the solution to that, very, very in line with what Lily says, get yourself a dedicated person. It helps you in 2 ways. First, you're clear that you can spend the money. That person is now having that. It's not an on-top task of some overworked person's desk who then cannot deliver, which leads to frustration on all sides. And also, you have an anchor point for these kind of activities in the company. And especially if there's a top-down high-level commitment in the company, and such a person can really be also the ambassador in the company. Let's face it, very often 80% of the company in the beginning will think, what is this EU research nonsense? What are we getting out of that? Get out there. We have problems with our tenants. We have problems with Corona. We need to take care of the elderly. We have social. Why do we do it? What do we do that for? So you will need an ambassador, very much like in the opposite side, the mirror side in academia. We need to constantly fight the case for societal impact, where the vice president for research says, why don't you just publish papers? Right? Our international ranking is not decided by how many building owners we make happy, how many tenants we take out of fuel poverty. It makes for a super nice story on the homepage of the university. In the end, the budget is allocated by research impact. So I think these kind of projects that we're talking about, which can be labeled under academic responsibility or societal impact or whatever, it's wanted, but the current mechanisms, the incentivation, is that an English word? Incentivation? The incentive. Thank you, Lily. Glad you for the. So the system is not yet set up to support that so much. So we are a little bit still a niche. We're a niche that is wanted, but you need to have dedicated people for that. So I would very much support that.
And I also would add, without marketing EFL, yeah. But marketing EFL, if you are involved in a network like our own, yeah. This is not to say that we can replace an EU funding officer, because we absolutely can't, but we can help you to gain access to, or similar networks to ours can help you to gain access to projects which may already be starting. We ourselves try to stimulate and follow and get involved in EU projects, and some of which we actually lead, because sometimes you need a not-for-profit or a certain level of legal status to lead some of the calls. So it may be worth thinking about also getting involved in some kind of network to just increase your access and knowledge of such EU funding programs and calls.
Okay, great, Lily. So anyone listening today, some of our stakeholders can get in touch with yourself if they are interested in getting involved in projects, or just even having a conversation about what it means. Because I know for a lot of people listening, it'll be a big step to go from working in an approved house body or a local authority to getting involved in an EU 2020 or H2020 or whatever EU funded is out there, a LIFE project. And it's the same for you, York. It might be kind of, I suppose scary for some people to ring up a university and ask, how do I get involved in these projects? And there's a lot of people out there across Ireland and Europe that might have great ideas for housing, but they don't know how to get involved with a university or a research project. York, is there any advice you would give to like an AHB or a local authority about making contact with research institutions that you're is there anything you could advise?
I would I mean, most of them have contacts to their local university, and I think that that is an essential player in this kind of scheme. It is a little bit sad, but also an important indicator in the success rate of these kind of applications is the reputation of the academic partner. There's a lot of trust given to industry stakeholders, right? The big industry stakeholders are very good. They have an industry stakeholder. They also have a small startup, very good. You do not have to justify why you as a building owner are relevant to the project, but the academic partner there suddenly the level of excellence is an indicator. So you want in your consortium to have at least 1 or 2 very high level academic partners which are active on a European level. The good thing is that these typically know how to run these projects. Your local university might not be into these kind of frameworks. Maybe you're lucky, maybe they are, maybe they're not. Get an international academic big player on the table as well. But especially in the later scaling phases, a local partner is really helpful. I mean, if you're sitting in Greece and your academic partner is UCL, well, they are top notch. They will run your project very smooth. After the project, they're gone because they run after the next bag of money. But your local university partner will still be there. So, and then get in touch. I mean, a call costs you nothing. We as an academic partner, I would always be interested in talking to a building owner and just listening to their view, even if not a project comes out of it. Understanding their situation and their view on the problem and their challenges better is just helpful. So it shouldn't be a big barrier to call up somebody. And I mean, I'm also open. You can contact me. I can. Depending on the question or the problem you have, I might forward you to other people who I feel are better suited. But having a quick chat over a coffee, and I mean, in these days it doesn't even need to be personal. You arrange for a Skype call or a Zoom call, and that's it.
York, you might want to be careful. You might be getting a few calls after this webinar. Your Zoom calendar will be booked out. Just one other thing, is the idea of scale and projects. Does EU-funded projects give an opportunity to do, say, things like retrofitting or at scale? Like, so in Ireland, a lot of our projects maybe are one-off housing and things like that. So is it an opportunity for maybe approved housing bodies or local authorities to get involved in the project to trial something at scale?
It would be very worth discussing. The problem is that the time frame is typically 4 years. Okay. The question is, and it's a big problem because very often, well, you need a year to get to know each other, right? And then the typical argument in the application is, we develop something and then we try it out. Well, you are on a tough timeline then. You need 1 year to get to know each other, then to come to a solution, and then it needs to be tendered, rolled out, planned, and executed. I've never seen that work in 4 years. So very often, what is done in the project was already decided 2-3 years ago. If we now talk scale, then I think it will be very difficult in a single project. But if scale is already the focus of a first phase, which might be project 1, and then you actually follow up with the scaling and look at specific scaling problems in project number 2, that might be an option. You might want to shift funding framework. You might say the first phase is a life kind of project, where you really know where you want to go, and then in a later phase of that project, you actually approach entities like banks, insurance companies, the EIB, and see how to actually finance the scaling. Because even if a life project or an H2020 project is 5 to 10 million, and you get maybe 1, that's not bad news. It's not enough for scaling retrofit. You need a bank, and you need tens of millions of euros, very likely. But I think from the talks that I have, the Commission is very open on that.
Okay, so yes, so I said the EU projects can be used to trial something, to look at innovation. However, so you take your learnings from that, and then you go look for further funding for scaling up.
Which will be other pots of money, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say this is where, for example, the investment side you're looking at, as York said, if you're trialing something, kind of piloting something with R&D, and then with maybe something like Interreg or Life, then you may be looking to go towards ELENA or the EIB basically to scale it later. But that's where as York says, you're getting into tens of millions if you're retrofitting a lot of stock. So there you really need investment partners.
Okay, so it's good to know that the EU project can be a stepping stone into this larger investment and this funding. Look, guys, I know we've had you on here now for the last hour and 15 minutes, so you're probably getting a little bit fatigued. But if I could just ask you, I suppose, to answer one last question or to leave our stakeholders with one last thought is, one positive element or one positive thing about getting involved in EU funding and projects, and then one challenge, I suppose, to be aware of. So if we could just kind of wrap up on that. So Lily, what do you think are like the positives from your point of view and the challenges you see? And then York, as an academic, the positives for having approved housing bodies or social housing providers involved, and the challenges maybe.
Well, I think the positive is obvious, that if you get to pilot a really, really successful, great solution, for example, to engage with tenants more, and this might be something that you then do use going forward, and potentially scale with more investment. And I would say you also get to network a lot. You get to meet partner organizations who you may well work with in future. The challenge, I would say, is having the resources and the time, and also knowing which program and which call in particular to go for, with such a big wide range of choices.
But EFL can help with that if you contact them.
Thanks, Aoife, doing my job for me. But EFL, yeah, we can very much help you with that. And we run a number of projects within our topic groups, several of which York is actually involved in. For example, on funding climate action and retrofitting. So we can help you both with the knowledge sharing side and with the partner and project finding side. And we're also, we're actually kind of launching an EU funding arm of EFL a little bit as the months are going ahead. By the new year, we should have more stuff happening in that area, and we will be subsidizing consultancy costs for EU projects run by EFL member organizations going forward. So we have some resources and a lot of knowledge and at our disposal, as York and Marie have very amply shown today. Yeah, thanks, Aoife.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lily. And York, final words from yourself on positives and maybe challenges?
I think the positive is really seeing the impact. I mean, of course, there are researchers who just delight in reports and then having a very important presentation in front of other very important people. But let's face it, these kind of reports, they very often end up somewhere and nobody really takes action on it. So working with stakeholders from society always has the benefit that you get a very direct feedback on how useful that is, what you produce there. And you get of course inspiration, and it's just, I mean, I studied architecture with a very constructive focus, but I studied architecture, and of course the beautiful thing about it is that you see something realized which you contributed to. And let's face it, a building is more pleasant to look at and be proud of than 50 pages of paper. Other academics might differ, but I think for the academics in that field, that's generally true. They like the impact idea of it. The challenge is always finding the right partner. That goes both sides, right? You need to find the right academic for you in the topic. The chemistry needs to work. We need to find the right housing association. I had everything from people from housing association filing for bankruptcy, being there was fraud, there was you don't know, right? So you build your repository and your network of trust over time, and you are constantly looking for the people where the chemistry is working well, where the vision is the same, and that you can work towards the goal. And there's lots of stumbling stones on the way. It's a rocky road, but with the right people, you get over it. If even a smooth road with wrong people is a bad trip. The rocky road with the right people can be a very, very fun experience. So that would be my final advice. Go into a European Union project application with people that you feel comfortable with. Because then even a failed application got you somewhere. So
brilliant. Well, thank you. I think going down the rocky road with the right people is great advice, not just for this webinar, not just for EU funding, but just for the current situation that we're in, even in life.
Oh, yeah.
And I definitely want to give you a call at another stage to hear about the fraud. But look, to yourself, York, to Lily, to Marie, to everyone listening, I want to thank you very much for your time, for your insights. We will send out a copy of the presentations and a recording of this on our YouTube webinar. As I said, this is one of a series of 4. We have another webinar next week on community-led regeneration. And then we also have another webinar on the 3rd of November with the Housing Agency and the Rental Tenancies Board, which will address the rights and responsibilities of landlords and tenants in managed residential estates, such as apartment developments. So log on to the Housing Agency for that. Again, I just want to thank you all for your time, and it's been very interesting. And York, be careful, you may get a couple of calls, and Lily, from people listening inquiring about
Great.
EU projects. Okay, thanks guys, and have a good afternoon. Bye bye.
Thanks, Aoife.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.